different. So, I'm going to read you a story about an American legend, John Henry, a steel driving man. This particular version, this is under 398.2 HEN. I put it under John Henry instead of Ezra Jack Keats, who wrote it, just because I have several books on John Henry and I wanted to make sure they were all in one place. So this is quite a cool book. And I like how he starts out with the big spike and the hammer. A hush settled over the hills. The sky swirled soundlessly around the moon. The river stopped murmuring. The wind stopped whispering. And the frogs and the owls and the crickets fell silent, all watching and waiting and listening. And then the river roared. The wind whispered and whistled and sang. The frogs croaked, the owls hooted, and all the crickets chirped. Welcome, welcome, echoed through the hills. And John Henry was born with a hammer in his hand. Bang, 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 said little John Henry's hammer through the cabin as he crawled about. Oh, what is that rascal up to now? His mother chuckled. And before she knew it, he was big enough to help her around the house. And as he grew up, he did a man's work with his father. And one day John Henry thought, I'm taller and stronger than anyone around. It's time I went out into the world. So he said goodbye to his mother and father, and off he went. He worked on farms and in cotton fields, but all that was too tame. So he got himself a job on a riverboat. And one stormy night, that ship plowed through the darkness, and suddenly the big steel rod that turned the paddle wheel broke. The wheel stopped turning. Smash went the rod through the bottom of the ship. Pump water, shouted the captain. Get to the port before we sink. John Henry leaped to that paddle wheel and crank. He seized it and he pushed and he grunted and he pulled, and slowly that giant wheel turned. And with all his strength he kept it turning. Lord Almighty help us, someone whispered in that long dark night. And as day broke, they sighted shore and pulled into port. And a thunderous cheer went up for John Henry. Well, John Henry felt a new excitement in the air. Men were talking of railroads being built from the Atlantic to the Pacific. They're going to lay those tracks over rivers, across prairies and deserts, and right through mountains. And through Indian lands, and stampeded buffalo herds and badlands. Goodbye, boys, cried John Henry. I'm going to swing me a hammer on them beautiful new tracks. My hands are just itching to hold a hammer again, John Henry said. And he tried one for size and laughed. It sure does feel fine. And how he drove those spikes, singing to the clanging of his hammer. And the men joined in, and their voices singing, and the hammers ringing, and John Henry's gang was in the lead, as day after the day, the tracks moved steadily westward. Rising across their path was a sprawling mountain range. Its snow-capped peaks reached high into the clouds. Oh, we'll have to tunnel through, said his friend, Little Bill. It'll be awful dangerous. Could be cave-ins, someone put in. That suits me fine, said John Henry. Me too, said Little Bill. And that's how we'll do it, boys, the foreman called out. A couple of men will drive the hole in the rock, and then the powder men will put in the dynamite into the hole and explode it, and the others will cart the loose rock away. We'll do this again and again till we have a tunnel right through this mountain. And it's going to be a real big tunnel, boys. Big enough for a giant locomotive pulling one of them long strings of trains. All right, boys, blast away. And deep into the mountains they worked, as John Henry's singing echoed through the tunnel. The powder men got ready to blast more rock, and they filled a hole with dynamite, put in a long fuse, and lit it. Run, men! Cried the foreman, and they all scrambled back ready to dash clear of the blast. And at that instant came a great cracking and rumbling, and the entire tunnel trembled around him. It's a cave-in! We're trapped! There was no place to run. The fuse burned closer to the dynamite. John Henry was nearest the fuse, and he ran to put it out, but he tripped and fell. Oh, I'm hurt bad, he groaned. I can't get up. The fuse burned further out of reach. Others rushed toward it, but they were too far away. Suddenly John Henry remembered. He still had his hammer in his hand, Down came the hammer, smack on the burning tip of the fuse, and the fuse was out. The danger passed. Sighs of relief filled the smoky tunnel. "Whew! Help me up, boys," mumbled John Henry. Clearing their way through the cave-in, the men carried him to safety. Some days later, they heard an unfamiliar clatter, and down the tunnel came a group of men with a strange-looking machine. "This is a steam drill. It can drill more holes and faster than any 6 men combined," a new man bragged. "Who can beat that?" Well, John Henry stepped forward. "Try me." He and Little Bill took their workplaces. John Henry gripped his hammer. Little Bill clutched his steel drill. "Check the machine," came an order, and a nervous hand fell on the switch, and in the dark both sides waited for the signal to start, and a hoarse voice counted 1, 2, 3, and the machine shrieked as it started. John Henry swung his hammer, and a crash of steel split the air. Clang, bang, clang, the drill got red hot in Little Bill's hands. He dropped it and picked up another. Hiss, whistle, rattle. Men were frantically heaved coal into the hungry, roaring engine and poured water into the steaming boiler. Whoop, clang, whoop, bang! John Henry's hammer whistled as he swung it. Chug, chug, clatter rattled the machine. Hour after hour raced by. The machine was ahead. "Hand me that 20-pound hammer, Little Bill." Harder and faster crashed the hammer. Great chunks of rock fell as John Henry ripped hole after hole into the tunnel wall. The machine rattled and whistled and drilled even faster. Friends doused John Henry and Little Bill with cold water to keep them going. And John Henry took a deep breath, picked up 2 sledgehammers, and saying, "Ain't no hammers strike such fire. Strike like lightning, Lord, and I won't tire. Hammers like this, Lord, there's never been. I'll keep swinging 'em, Lord, till we win." And John Henry swung both mighty hammers faster and faster. He moved so fast the men could only see a blur and sparks from his striking hammers. His strokes ran out like great heartbeats. And at the other side of the tunnel, the machine shrieked and groaned and rattled and drilled, and then all at once it shook and shuddered. It wheezed and it stopped. Frantically, the men worked to get it going again, but they couldn't. It had collapsed. John Henry's hammering still sang and echoed through the tunnel with a strong and steady beat. And suddenly there was a great crash. Light streamed into the dark tunnel. John Henry had broken through. With wild cries of joy burst from the men, still holding one of his hammers. John Henry stepped out into the glowing light of a dying day, and it was the last step he ever took. Even the great heart of John Henry could not bear the strain of his last task. John Henry died with a hammer in his hand. And if you listen to the locomotives roaring through the tunnels and across this land, you'll hear 'em singing of that great steel-driving man, John Henry. Woo, woo, you listen. That is a great legend. Now there is another book that I have got to find about a man who wrote a book about trying to find the real true John Henry. Because most legends are based on a real true person, even though all parts of the story may not be true. So I will probably get that book by next year. But I just thought, it's a great story. So let me stop that.